Okay, I think there are a few people still joining, but I think for the sake of time, I think we can get going. So, good afternoon, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us on this session and webinar, where we will be speaking about wellness, burnout, and how leaders could support their teams. I know it's obviously been a challenging year or two, and one of the issues that we're seeing in the workplace a lot is this issue about burnout, and in many cases we need to support our staff and help them to manage this difficult time as well. But just quickly, before I introduce you to our speaker for today, I just want to just give you a quick introduction about Yellow Seed. So some of you may know us quite well already. We know there's some of our clients on the line. So welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining. For those of you that don't know, Yellow Seed is a talent management consultancy. We've been privileged over the last few years to really grow in aspects that have been very important for businesses, is how we engage our employees during a low-touch economy. And we've grown on the learning and development side. So some of the products and services that we offer as Yellow Seed, apart from talent management, is to assist with assessments. So we've got some really incredible assessment products that we have available, and that we have really spent time ensuring that we've got newer products that's cutting edge and really assists in making the right decisions, whether it's for hiring purposes or for development. We've also engaged with some of the world's fastest growing companies from a talent management point of view, especially in the talent management platforms like Feel 50 as an example, and really privileged to be in partnership with these companies on some of these products coming into the market. We also have a very strong learning and development division, as I said earlier, and one of the fastest growing aspects that we've seen is on the learner management side as well, to see how we can help companies get their content alive and how we can get their employees to engage in the right way with learning, and whether it's distance learning, blended approach, or whatever the need is. We're really passionate about learning in that aspect, and just help to create learning organizations, which is why we really love the webinar concept, just to share some of the insights that we've learned and how we can really get some of that information across and assist companies to really understand some of these issues that everybody is dealing with, and knowing that you're not alone when it comes to these issues. We also are very privileged over the last few years to have really worked on learning strategy projects. So one of the aspects that we really enjoy getting involved with is helping companies sort out their learning strategy, and then looking at how to engage their employees, whether that's through specific interventions or using products to assess, and using more larger data analytics to provide feedback to the organization. So very, very passionate about helping you unleash your exponential potential within your organization. So if for any reason any of these issues are prevalent and you would like to reach out, I will make sure that our team sends out, you'll get an email later today or tomorrow, just as a summary to this conversation today, and get some more information about us and how to get in contact. So we would absolutely love to hear from you. But for now, I just want to introduce Lumay Kokomur. She's a professor at Northwest University. She's our head of people development at Yellow Seed, and she'll be speaking today, as I said, about a very burning question and platform about wellness and how we can help out and support our teams to prevent them from burnout. So Lumay, welcome, and thank you for taking us through this session.
Thank you, Cyril, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to help us think through this, as Cyril was saying, this really pertinent topic. Let me just start by sharing my screen. I perhaps want to kick us off by doing just a bit of a Mentimeter activity. And I'm going to ask each of you, so you can take your phones or your laptops and just go to www.menti.com. And when it asks for the code, you can type in the code 77323927 that you're seeing on the screen. And I'd like to just invite us all to think about what are the top 3 things that cause the most stress to me at the moment. Just curious about the stresses that's in this room. So we're going to talk about how do we deal with the stress that we're dealing with? How do we prevent burnout? What are some of those stresses? Family, money, work. Those of you that have just joined, just doing a bit of an interactive Mentimeter activity, you can go to www.menti.com and type in the code, and then type out the 3 things that cause the most stress to you at the moment. What are some of those stresses, things that we're dealing with as an organization, as leaders, as parents, as in any of the particular roles that you can think of? So some lovely inputs coming from many of you. So it looks like relationships, workload, finances, no breaks, load shedding challenges absolutely this week. Studies, some students on the call. See lots of financials, so money, future finances, returning to the office, demanding work. So again, the workload theme. COVID being one of the key themes, also parenting, time management, job security, health and fitness, bureaucracy, feeling out of control. Okay. All right, so a lot of the themes grouping together around family, around finances, around workload, managing the relationships in our life. For some of us, it's our kids. For some of us, it might be spouses or parents, caring for our parents, etc. So those being some of the key themes. I'm going to give it another few seconds. If you'd like to add any last stresses, then I'm going to go to the next question. Kids' health, I see also coming through. Family balance, we're going to definitely talk about that. We're going to talk about mental insecurities, see that coming through. All right. Awesome. So let me go to the next question. Just give me a moment. There we go. Oops. So which of the following is true of my current state? So there's 6 questions, and I would like you just to give your response for each of the 6. Which of the following is true of my current state? These are all questions related to high levels of stress and burnout. So it's just a bit of a gauge of how we are feeling as a group in terms of our own levels of stress and burnout. A lot of us saying we feel exhausted most of the time. Some of us saying that sleep and time off don't refuel us. Some of us are saying I'm worried about the future. Let's give another, I'm going to give another 2 minutes or so. just as you all think through the question. Looks like most of us have answered. So we're going to talk about the aspects, the symptoms of burnout, all 6 of these relating to particular symptoms of burnout. And it's interesting. So from a group of 34 respondents, at least 21 out of 34 answered that you feel exhausted most of the time, which is one of the symptoms of burnout. 18 out of 34, just over 50%, is worried about the future. Almost 50% or sleep and time off don't refuel me. Some of us struggling with not sleeping well. Some of us struggling with productivity that has dropped. And then a handful saying, I feel like I have lost my passion. All right, so even amongst this group of people, we do see that that high levels of stress and burnout really is something that we are struggling with. Let me just get my slides up. So as Sarah said, my role is head of people development. And this particular topic is something that I am extremely passionate about. I've been involved in, especially with leaders and guiding and coaching leaders in how to deal with wellness, with stress, with burnout in their team, how to create psychologically safe environments that foster the opposite of stress and burnout, well, unhealthy stress and burnout. And so it's a great privilege for me to present this topic to you today. And just looking through some of the colleagues that have joined me, there's some amazing inputs in the room as well. So by all means, please feel free to comment. Please feel free to provide additional insights. I think it's something that we're all struggling with. We're all needing to navigate high levels of stress and really supporting the people around us. And as we saw on the Mentimeter, I think what the data is telling us that just by looking at the people in this room and the high levels of some of the symptoms of burnout, we are not alone, right? The symptoms that we're experiencing is really symptomatic of what we're seeing in the environments around us. And I just wanted to share some of the studies, the recent studies that have come out. So this was a UK and US based study. And you can see that the high levels of depression before the pandemic, during the pandemic, both in the UK and in the US were markedly higher. These studies were done or concluded in 2020. Consequently, there have been other studies that have actually reported even higher jumps in an increase in depression and anxiety. Another study, many of you have seen the study, the South African context. So a lot more individuals experiencing higher levels of emotional and psychological stress, and markedly higher this year than it has been in pre-COVID statistics. Also interesting to note, this is a US study, but there have also been findings reporting globally that this is prevalent, that we're seeing that the highest level of anxiety and depression really coming out in our young adults, ages between 18 to 24. 56.2% of adults aged 18 to 24 is estimated to be experiencing anxiety and depression in some form or state. 48.9% in the age group 25 to 49, and then it goes all the way down in the 50 to 64 and 65 category. So really, when we talk about how do we support our employees, it's not that we don't need to support our older employees, but there's really a significant impact that we're seeing in our young graduates, in our younger working group. And so it's also the question around how do we support, in particular, that age group as we support the rest of the business. The second thing that I also just wanted to highlight is, and this is quite specific when as a community, I know there's a lot of HR and industrial psychology colleagues on the call. And so when we go out into the business, it's not just about doing the right thing. That is super important. And I think from a values point of view, we've all realized through the pandemic how important it is to drive wellness, to drive resilience, so that we all are able to withstand the pressures that we're going through. But there's also a return on investment. There's a bottom line indicator here as well. And so I just highlighted these two stats that in a recent survey of CEOs, employee well-being was identified as the top area where CEOs say their companies have struggled the most during the pandemic. And 63% of employers are offering wellness programs and are reporting increased financial sustainability and growth because of that. There's many other studies. These were just two that I wanted to highlight. And so I think it's also our responsibility to start highlighting the business advantage of employee health, well-being, and lowering levels of burnout, upping levels of resilience, because it has such a positive impact on the business and financial sustainability. So with that burning platform in mind, what I'd like to talk about today is really understanding stress and burnout. I think those two words are used interchangeably often when we talk with our clients, and especially when I do coaching. Often people would say, you know, I'm really burnt out. And I think it's quite important that we understand what is stress and what is clinical burnout, and how do we differentiate between the two? How do we deal with stress? How do we deal with burnout? Sometimes it could be the same, but oftentimes it's very specific and quite unique in how we deal with stress and burnout as leaders. Secondly, I want to talk about what differentiates those individuals that are coping and those that don't. And really tapping into resilience. What do resilient individuals do differently over those that are really struggling to remain resilient? And then in the third section, we're really just going to talk about some practical tips and strategies from an individual point of view. We're going to take a leader lens, and then we're also going to take an organizational lens and learn from what some of the top leading organizations have done to really address some of the mental health concerns that we've come across. All right. So let's start off by just talking through stress, fatigue, and burnout. And I'm going to start with stress. So stress involves too many pressures that demand too much of someone from a physical or mental point of view. It's often characterized by over-engagement. It's usually results in reactive or overactive emotions. So when I'm highly stressed, the smallest thing can have an overreaction in emotion. With stress, there's usually a sense of urgency and hyperactivity. So doing too much, too fast, everything's quite urgent. There is a loss of energy when we're in hyper stress mode. It could be really physically tolling. But the big differentiator, I think, between stress and burnout is that when we're hyper stressed and not yet leaning towards burnout, the end is still in sight. I can feel I'm really tired. I can feel that it's taxing, that there isn't energy, but I can see the end in sight. If I just get over this project, if I just get over this season, if my budget time is complete, if this financial year end, you know, whatever some of those end goals might be, you know that the stress or whatever is causing the stress will subside once that is reached. Burnout, on the other end, is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that is caused by excessive, prolonged stress. So it's almost a continuum. If we don't get our stress under control, and if it continues over a long period of time, it could lead to burnout. And so burnout looks slightly different to stress, right? So whereas stress is characterized by over-engagement, I'm saying no saying yes to too many things. I'm involved in quite a lot. I'm over-engaging. Burnout is often characterized by disengagement, a feeling that I don't want to engage with anything. Instead of having reactive or overactive emotions where something small would create heightened emotions, I often, the people struggling with burnout would often complain that they are not feeling anything. They're not feeling any emotion. So there's a sense of blunted or distant emotions. Instead of that sense of urgency or hyperactivity, there's a sense of helplessness. It's beyond the activity and it's gone into helplessness. Instead of a loss of energy, it often has, it usually does involve a loss of physical energy as well, but it also results in a loss of motivation, ideals, and hope. So that helplessness really being a strong characteristic. It's both emotionally and physically tolling. And then the big differentiator, as I said, is that often when we've reached burnout, we cannot see the end. The end of the tunnel is so far away that even if this project comes to an end, I just don't see it coming to a close. So that's between stress and burnout. And then the third thing that I'd like to just share, and that's something that is very unique to where we find ourselves at the moment, is a term called pandemic fatigue. And so pandemic fatigue is a very real feeling of exhaustion as a result of the impact of COVID-19, whether it's the impact of quarantining, it could be loss of job, it could be the fear of getting sick, the anxiety of what's out there, what if I touch this, what if I'm in contact with this person, what will happen, the fear of loved ones being in hospital, etc. So the impact, not just the physical impact, but the emotional impact that COVID-19 has had on our lives. And it's experienced differently for different people. But what we've seen in the research is that it often presents itself with feelings of restlessness, irritability, lacking motivation, and often difficulty concentrating on tasks. We may even notice that we are withdrawing from socializing. And there might even be physical symptoms. So it could be change in your eating habits. It could be change in your sleeping habits. And there's a markedly different experience to work compared to pre-pandemic and what you're experiencing now. The relationship to work has changed. And there's often what we're seeing again in the research is that there is a connection with work that brings a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, even though some of the responsibilities might be the same. There might not have been many changes in the actual work that I'm doing. The way that I'm doing it, absolutely, work from home, etc., might be changing. But because of the impact of COVID, the relationship and the emotions that are coming up are often characterized with anxiety and helplessness and irritability. All right. So if we delve just a little bit deeper into stress, many of you have seen this curve. We talk about the optimal level of stress. And so this is also there's been just amazing research around the positive effects of stress. So if there is no stress, we see very low levels of work performance. Individuals would be experiencing a lot of boredom, so they're quite calm, but there's no motivation, there's no sense of passion. And so that boredom doesn't really relate to high levels of performance, which is what we obviously want from the majority of our workforce. On the other end of the scale is where we start getting to burnout. And that is when the higher the level of stress, we see a decline in the work performance again. And we start seeing fatigue, exhaustion, ill health, and at the very high levels, we do see a complete either emotional or physical breakdown. And so what we're looking for when we talk about stress is really the concept of flow, right? So if we think about the work that Csikszentmihalyi has done around flow, being energized, being focused, and really being in that optimal performance where there's just enough stress to motivate us, to get us going, and to heighten our work performance, but managing that balance. So in my experience, especially these last 2 years, the tipping point that many of us are struggling to manage is more on the green-red side rather than the yellow-green side. And so finding that tipping point for all of us and really understanding, where do I start to move over to distress, and how do I recognize some of those symptoms within myself? So firstly, but then secondly, also, how do I see those symptoms within my people that I'm leading, so that I can better support them? Also, just as a reminder, so when we think about stress, and many of you would know this, there are certain neural responses that are activated. And some of these could be useful and helpful, and some of these, if prolonged, can be extremely damaging. And so just as a reminder, so at the back end of our brains, where the brainstem is situated, it's the blue part on this sketch, and the bottom a yellow part. That's the part of the brain that identifies danger. It's constantly scanning the world, does so at split seconds, trying to identify what could be dangerous physically, emotionally. Will this car, miss me? Will I step over something and possibly trip? So physical danger, definitely, but then also emotionally, what might be happening? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Is this too much? What is this person going to say? Will they throw me under the bus? Is it safe for me to talk in this meeting? So constantly scanning what is dangerous. The moment it picks up danger, it will go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, most often fight or flight. And so it also sends out the stress signal, right? So when the stress signal is sent out, a couple of things happen in our brains. The first is that all of our extra resources, our blood levels, our oxygen levels, are taken away from the almost the luxury places in our body, and we go into energy saving mode, and all of these resources get pumped to our extremities, to our survival parts of our bodies, so that we can fight this lion or run away from the lion. And so when that happens, we, in energy saving mode, some of our higher order functioning is just shut off. Our thinking brains, our problem solving, our empathy levels, our ability to think creatively and innovatively, all of those are shut down, because that's the way that we survive. That part of the brain needs to go into energy saving mode so that we can really fight the stress signal accordingly. The other thing that happens is that a lot of our stress hormones are activated. And whether it's cortisol or adrenaline, we all know that these hormones have a very positive effect in the immediate moment, because it allows us to think with heightened or use our senses with heightened energy. So we can respond much quicker. We have heightened senses, as I said. But what we also know is that from a long-term impact, when these hormones are activated too regularly, it actually has detrimental effects to our mental and our physical health in the long term. So just as a reminder, so we're either going to fight or flight. Our brains, our higher order functioning is shut down, and certain hormones are secreted to help us deal with the threat. So we talk about the reptilian brain when we talk about this part of the brain, and that's because reptiles only have that part of the brain. They're not as evolved as human beings. So reptiles have two responses when they're in danger. They're either going to eat the predator or they're going to run away from the predator. And so when we're dealing with high levels of stress and burnout in the workplace, it's important to realize that when we are in our brainstem state, in our reptilian state, we do not have the resources we need to actually elevate our thinking and get us out of that rat race. The second part of the brain is the green part as marked in the sketch. This is obviously quite a rudimentary sketch. There's a lot more intricacies in the brain. But in essence, this is the limbic system. And this is the part of the brain where our emotions reside. And there's a direct link between our brainstem and our emotions. And it's interesting, right? So if I were to ask you to feel angry right now at the drop of a hat, you all would say, it's not something I can do. I can think about something that could possibly make me angry. And that's exactly what we also need to remember about emotions under stress. When we experience stressful emotions, things like, and it's usually, the top 4, it's either anger, anxiety, depression, irritation. Those are usually the 4 that we would see coming out with high levels of stress and burnout. When we experience these emotions, we always need to ask why. Where are they coming from? What are the trigger points that are highlighting some of these emotions? When the chemical balances in our brain are not in a healthy state, sometimes, something small could trigger something, could trigger.
No.
Great. Let me just share my screen again. Okay. All right. So we got the limbic system. Third part of the brain is our thinking brain. So that is the part of the brain, our neocortex. So we've got our prefrontal cortex. It goes all the way through to the back. And that's our higher order functioning, right? So that's the part of the brain that can problem solve, that can listen, that can empathize, that can think creatively. And that's really the part of the brain that we want the most when we think about the workplace and our employees, because that's the part of the brain that leads to increased innovation, motivation, collaboration, etc. And so just as a reminder, as I said earlier, there's a lovely theory that talks about flipping your switch. So the moment we go into stress mode, our brains flip the switch and our thinking brain is shut off so that our instinctive brain is able to drive our survival instincts. And so when we think about what we could do as leaders to support our employees better, it's really about how do we get them to higher order functioning as quickly as possible. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Whether it is helping employees to reflect on their emotions, so bringing in the limbic system into the conversation, whether it is setting your reptilian, your instinctive brain at ease, because when we're in that stress state, it's often not something that we have control over. When it happens, and it's really difficult actually to control it. So we need to create environments, support structures, coping mechanisms around us that actually help us to alleviate some of the stress symptoms as we build better coping mechanisms. And then there also are ways, especially in conflict. So we do a lot of training with leaders and teams where we train them through specific processes to better manage the conflict so that they're activating their thinking brains and not dealing with conflict or difficult conversations from their reptilian or even their emotional brain, but that they're really activating their thinking brain. All right, so fight or flight response to stress. So I am a clinical trained imago therapist, and this comes from the imago therapy. We talk about hailstorms and turtles. It's just a lovely picture that I like to use. And so it's useful when we think about stress to understand that some of us go into fight response when we're under severe stress. We will have a visible emotional reaction. We'll have a sense of urgency and a lot of aggression. So that's when we're hailstorming, right? And if you see that within yourself or within employees, to know this is the fight response to stress. Some of us have a turtle response to stress. So we go into the flight response. Our emotions are stuffed under the lid. We tend to withdraw. We tend to avoid responding to whatever the stress stimuli was. And we tend to respond with a passive aggressive state. So we're not responding with overt aggression, but behind it all, there is still a lot of passive aggressiveness. And so understanding the behavior, and that's why I wanted to just share this section around the brain, because it really does help as a leader to just dissect and understand the behavior that you're seeing. So if there is a heightened, if you've known this employee for quite some time and you're starting to see either of these responses, and that's not the general way that the individual responds, even if it is the general way, it could also be heightened levels of stress, to understand the reaction. The reaction is the brainstem that is going into fight or flight response, and it's really a sense of survival. It's not something that they do, that they choose, or that they do overtly. With personal mastery and emotional intelligence training and development, it is possible to bypass and to learn better coping mechanisms, so that it's not just your brainstem that's constantly leading the way, but you need to recognize what is happening. All right, so that's what I wanted to just discuss around stress and understanding some of the nuances under stress. The last thing that I maybe just want to mention is that what we've seen with many of our clients, the need within the current environment is really to be agile and to innovate. Agile in terms of our adaptability, so many changes happening at the same time, processes, working schedules, having kids and all of it in the same place. And then the second one is really being able to think out of the box and creatively, because we've been dealt with quite a few challenges that we've never had to face. The need is for our employees to really think about what they have been doing all along in a very different way. And so amidst what the environment is requesting of our employees, and amidst the uncertainty and all of the stress that comes with, as we heard in terms of pandemic fatigue, we need to understand that in that environment, our brains are not built for innovation and agility amidst everything else that's going on. And so therefore, just thinking that, employees need to figure it out themselves, they need to just activate their innovative state, is really difficult, because it's not the way that our brains were wired. It's not the way that we deal with stress. When we're in stress, we save energy, we don't exert energy. So it's really important that leaders are intentional and deliberate about what are the ways that we can really reduce some of the stress, that we can learn better coping mechanisms, so that our employees can get to agility, innovation, resilience, etc. All right, so moving over to burnout, and just diving into burnout a little bit deeper. So if we think about the signs of burnout, you would have seen this in the Mentimeter. Your passion fades, you no longer feel the highs and lows, so that blunted emotions. Little things make you disproportionately emotional. You become cynical. You're seeing a decrease in cognition, decision-making, and productivity. Often when you've reached burnout, we see individuals self-medicating, whether it's drugs, alcohol, binge eating. It could even be workaholism. So whenever you feel bad, you have this urge to go and do something and self-medicate. Sleep and time off no longer refuel you, because if you're burning out, it's deeper than exhaustion. It's deeper than just the physical tired feeling. We often see reduced sleep, especially in the early stages of burnout. Insomnia and reduced sleep are common signs. In fact, according to the National Sleep Foundation, regularly getting less than 6 hours of sleep is one of the best predictors of burnout. And then exhaustion. So whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or social, the toll of burnout really causes a huge energy depletion. And so I think the important thing to understand around burnout is that there are different stages of burnout. And depending on the stage of burnout that you find yourself in, or that your employees might be in, it really requires different strategies, coping strategies to address. So in stage 1, there's a honeymoon stage, which is marked by high job satisfaction, energy, and creativity. If the coping strategies are positive and adaptive, we're able to remain in this stage, even if the stress symptoms continue or the stimuli continues. But obviously, very few people do, because we don't have those coping strategies in place. So if the stress continues and the environment that causes the stress is still prevalent, we tend to then move into stage 2, which is a balancing act. So there's an awareness of a noticeable increase in job dissatisfaction. There's an increase in fatigue, sleep disturbances, and we start to see work inefficiency and also escapist activities. So you know what you need to do, you know what the responsibility is, but we see you start to daydream about just getting out. You know, I wish I could be in this career, or I wish I could work in this organization, or I wish I could be like that person. So starting to daydream about getting out of your job, your life, your situation. If that continues, again, if the stress continues and the symptoms get heightened, we move into stage 3, where we start seeing chronic symptoms. So in terms of a longer term impact, so an intensification of stage 2 symptoms, and we start to see things like chronic exhaustion, physical illness, long levels of anger and depression, not being able to pull yourself out. So we all have bouts of anger and feeling sad, right? But this is where it's that prolonged chronic feelings of I'm constantly angry, I'm constantly depressed. And so if you start seeing a lot of these symptoms happening for long periods of time, this is really from end of stage 2, stage 3, that's when we really need to start supporting these employees, getting outside professional help so that they're able to deal with it before it moves into stage 4, which is the crisis stage. And here's where the symptoms become critical. Physical symptoms will intensify. We start to obsess about our work frustrations. It's all we can think about. Even if something good comes into our lives or something typically we would enjoy, we cannot seem to not think about these frustrations. We see a lot of pessimism and self-doubt dominating the thinking. So the crisis stage, really obsessive thinking, not able to, so we feel stuck in our thinking. Secondly, physical symptoms really intensifying to quite a bad point. And then stage 5 is really where the symptoms that we are experiencing is so embedded in our life that we can't seem to differentiate burnout from mental or physical illness. And that's where we really start to see it being enmeshed with a lot of other illnesses because of the prolonged burnout. Clearly, we don't want ourselves or any of our employees to get to stage 4 or prolonged stage 5, because often in stage 5, the damage is to the extent that it can't be undone. And so there's quite a lot of research showing that once we get to stage 4 or stage 5, there's real concern for permanent damage in physical and mental well-being. All right. Please feel free to pop any questions that you might have in the chat box. We will be giving time at the end. I'm trying to go through this as quickly as possible so that we could get to some of those questions. All right. So hopefully we've got a good sense of the difference between stress and burnout and what either of these look like. And so let's talk about what could we do to manage high levels of stress and prevent burnout. And so I've been doing quite a lot of research for other projects, leadership projects that we're busy with. And we've highlighted that there are 10 things that resilient people do differently. There's quite a few references that I've engaged to get to this list of 10, and we'll be sharing some of the slides with you and a a more detailed resource after this that just lists some of the references that you can go through as well. But as a starting point, resilient people practice self-awareness. We see markedly different results from those that were able to cope with the pandemic and high levels of stress and those that couldn't, in their sense of self-awareness, especially into their emotions, understanding this is what I'm experiencing, reflecting on this is why I'm experiencing it. So really the brain picture that I showed earlier, understanding their triggers, their brainstem reaction, their limbic system reaction, and then using the prefrontal cortex to really reflect on what now that I'm aware of it, what can I do? So the second thing that we note is that they develop high quality supportive relationships. And that's why the pandemic has been so difficult for many of us, because we weren't able to utilize those relationships. And so the sense of isolation and not being around the people that I love, not being able to see them, to be with them physically, physical presence has been really difficult. But when we have supportive relationships, we see a dramatic increase in resilience. Third one, they actively seek different perspectives to shape their own. And so that's where the link between diversity and inclusion and resilience comes in. When we are able to not just accept different perspectives, but really actively seek different perspectives, we are training our brains to deal with difference, uncertainty, change, because inevitably getting different perspectives will challenge our own thinking, will challenge and bring about change. So we're practicing change and managing and adapting to change. They rest regularly, and this is probably the area where so for me, I've done the most research in really understanding what does rest look like. And I think that there's really a missing link. A lot of the coaching that I'm doing is really teaching leaders to rest properly, to teach them how our bodies, how our brains have been put together to really perform, to up our performance, to get to peak performance through a rest and activity cycle. And I think there's really a missing link there, something that we're not getting to. When we're constantly active, constantly working, and we're not resting, we're actually getting the exact opposite of what we want. We're not getting to peak performance by just putting in more hours, more meetings, more deliverables, more goals. By actually introducing more rest, a more active rest, more intentional rest, we are able to be more resilient. And so there's some really cool tips and tricks in terms of your daily, weekly, monthly, yearly rhythms. I'll maybe do a talk on rest because there is a lot that I can say just about rest. The fifth thing is around daily rhythms and habits and really being intentional. So I've worked with some amazing leaders who have been very deliberate around their scheduling and what they allow into their diaries and what not. And what are the non-negotiables in terms of exercise, in terms of what time they go to sleep. So it's not something that just happens to them. They're very intentional about their habits and their rhythms every day. Next, they put effort into managing their physical health, which obviously wouldn't come as a surprise, but those that are resilient have a better physical state and they manage that quite proactively. They also focus on the positive and look for opportunities. There's really great research talking about the impact of gratitude and having a gratitude journal, for example, and how that influences our ability to be more resilient, it releases higher levels of optimism and gives us a sense of meaning, which brings energy. So really focusing on the positive, really looking for the things that I have that I can be grateful for is probably also a habit that a lot of resilient people are enforcing. They manage their thinking and information consumption. What they read, what they talk about, what they watch, what they listen to, what they are thinking is deliberate. It's not just, everything I consume, especially in this time where we are bombarded with social media, with negativity in social media. Resilient people choose what they consume. They choose the sources that they trust, and they are quite deliberate in switching off and not allowing other sources that are harmful into their lives. They ruthlessly manage their boundaries and priorities. I think it links to the rhythms and the habits point that I mentioned earlier. And then the last one, they pursue meaningful and purposeful activity. So that link to Maslow's, self-actualization is extremely important. When we are able to find the meaning, to find the purpose behind what we are doing, we're able to really withstand quite a lot of stress and pressure because we know why we're doing it. If there's no meaning, if there's no purpose behind it, it's really difficult to go through pain, to go through struggle, to go through frustration if we don't have that grounding of meaning. So from an individual point of view, these are some of the things that you can really encourage within yourself. There's a lot of tools and activities and things that we can share with you if you're interested, especially in terms of some of those daily rhythms and habits. So, but from an individual point of view, these are some of the tips and things to focus on. If we then look at what leaders can do to support employees who are struggling with their mental well-being or burnout, I wanted to just highlight these 8 things. The first one is for leaders to normalize the conversation. And so a lot of let me say us, a lot of employees are fearful of talking about what they're going through. What will my leaders say? Will I be judged? Will I be seen as weak? Will I be seen as a poor performer if I actually admit that I'm struggling, that these are some of the emotions that I'm experiencing? And so as a leader, we really have such a strong role to play to normalize it, to make it okay, to not be okay. And whether that is talking about mental health in a regular way, or whether it is sharing some of your own struggles with mental well-being and what you're going through, or sharing some resources, make it safe for the people in your team to talk about what they are experiencing. The second thing is to empathize and check in regularly. So remember, when we say empathize, what is empathize? It's really about, let me understand your world. Let me leave my world aside for a moment. I'm going to walk over the bridge and I'm going to visit your world and really thoroughly understand your world. And so that's why the check-in is so important. I think often leaders will have, whether it's weekly or monthly check-ins, and it's very task focused. What are you busy with? Where are you with this thing, etc. But it's, especially in this time, it's so important to really check in with, how are you doing? And please go further than the how are you, and ask, how are you really doing? How are you coping? How are you feeling in terms of your own emotions or your workload, etc. So that you really are able to understand the nuances of what the employee is struggling with. We are all in this thing together, but we experience it very differently. And so it's quite important to understand their unique world by checking in with them regularly. And also checking in regularly, because just because someone was okay a month ago doesn't mean they are okay now. And so really gauging where they are at right now and what support they might need. The third thing, and this is probably one of the biggest shifts that have happened, the positive shifts that have happened with the pandemic, is leaders are more able to offer flexibility. They've been forced to offer flexibility. But I think even post, when employees start to return to work or to a hybrid type of environment, to still maintain some form of flexibility, understanding the unique situation, understanding the unique requirements and the support that would be helpful, giving guidelines and boundaries. So often, the flexibility has boundaries, and be clear about those boundaries, but then within that, offer flexibility. It's so interesting just to see what the research is telling us over the last 12 months, and how organizations that were able to offer higher flexibility it resulted in higher levels of productivity. And we've seen this all along, right? So the industrial psychology field has been promoting the research around flexibility for quite a while, because we knew that the research showed high flexibility really results in high productivity. But I think the pandemic forced everyone to go into it, and now we're starting to see some of those fruits. The fourth one talks about work-life balance and really encouraging true work-life balance. A lot of conversation that you can have with employees about what does that look like. I think I've met quite a few leaders who are talking about we need to have work-life balance, but when it gets to role modeling or really creating a culture that encourages true work-life balance, it starts to fall through the cracks. So as a leader, really talk about work-life balance with your team. What does it look like? What are the non-negotiable work hours? What is allowed when we are on leave, when someone is off on a weekend? How do we allow them to have true work-life balance? What is off bounds? So really figuring out the boundaries for you as a team and what that looks like. And of course, role modeling that. The second one, the fifth one is specific to the work from home or hybrid environment that we find ourselves in right now, where we don't have as much access to our staff as we usually would have, where we see each other in a corridor and we can say, you know what, remember this, or just, some of those over the water cooler conversations. So when in doubt, I want to encourage you to really err on the side of over communicating changes that are happening, re-clarifying some of the expectations, re-emphasizing what you want your employees to focus on, but constantly communicating. The organizations that were able to maintain high levels of communication, especially from your executive leaders, are the organizations that really thrived in the COVID time. So there's lots of really great research also supporting that. Prioritize training. So a lot of the symptoms that lead to high levels of stress, high levels of burnout, is often staff that don't feel that they have the competence to do what is required. So whether training is to equip, to ensure competence, by all means, prioritize that. But then there's also training that needs to happen around well-being and burnout. And I think it's so nice to hear that this year, 2020, end of 2020, all the way through to 2021, there's been a heightened awareness of mental well-being. And I think a lot more leaders are starting to realize how important it is and the role that they are playing. And so if you have leaders reporting to you, make sure that you are training them on how to support their employees, how to watch out for burnout, how to be sensitive, what to ask, how to listen, and so how to deal with some of the issues that we're seeing. Also to look at capacity often. I almost want to highlight this as probably one of the most important ones of all of them. Really thinking through, what are the priorities in this team? Do we have the capacity that we need? Do we have the competence that we need? How are my employees feeling in terms of workload? And really doing that as often as possible. So that workforce planning aspect, so that we're not just dumping more and more and more duties onto our employees, but we're really thinking through what work needs to be done? What do we have? What skills, what capacity do we have? And do those two correlate? If not, what are the strategies? How do we brainstorm together? There might be some priorities that are going to fall off of the list. There might be gig workers that we could bring in to support us for some of it. There might be competence issues that we need to address. So whatever the strategies are, it needs to be addressed head on. And then I think I already mentioned this, it's really about modeling healthy behaviors. If you're able to share what you're doing in your rhythms, if you're able to share how you're creating boundaries, how you are keeping healthy, how you have reinforced better sleep habits, whatever that may be, but really modeling that so that it becomes a safe topic, a normal topic that all of your team members are engaging because they see that it is important to you. Okay. So those are just a couple of tips that I think leaders can focus on. There was quite I wanted to maybe just share a bit more around the capacity matter, but I think we are going to run out of time. If you want to read a book that really talks to that aspect quite well, there's a book called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McEwen. That is an absolutely amazing resource for leaders, talking about the highest point of contribution. So what is the right thing with the right reason at the right time, rather than just doing everything that everyone is asking of me. Many of you would know the urgent versus important, the Eisenhower matrix. And so it's really getting back to some of the basics of what should we be doing versus what should go onto our to-don't list, things that we did in the past that actually is just not a priority anymore. There's so many new things that have come onto our plates that are now extremely critical and high priority. And so how are we getting to essential tasks, essential activities? If we are able to pursue less, I really truly believe that there will be such an enhanced impact on the stress levels that our employees are experiencing. And so from an organizational perspective, what are we seeing? So what are leading organizations focusing on? They're creating cultures that take regular breaks. They are embedding the well-being message into the way they do things. So from their strategy to KPIs to meetings, it's not just something that we say because we know we need to. It's being embedded into everything that we do. They create opportunities for employees to share what they are feeling, what they're experiencing. And there's some lovely technology tools as well that can be utilized to do that. They're sharing mental health resources among staff. Many of them have prioritized I came across an organization that's talked about an unsick day. So it's really about preventative care, or mental health days, but really providing reflection time and time off for individuals to focus on their mental health. I think the important disclaimer there is to provide a day where people are able to reflect. So if I also do work with a legal firm and who provided a mental health day, but they didn't adjust the billable hours for that month. So no one took the mental health day because they still had to bill the 8 hours that typical day would have required in the month. So really provide that reflective ability. Setting up fitness groups or challenges, having visual reminders. So when we're back in the office, having visual reminders, having screensavers, having newsletters, messages, really constantly reminding our staff that this is important to us. Here's some tips, leaders, this is what you need to be paying attention to. And this is really helpful. I didn't talk about that from a neuroscience perspective, but if we're wanting to change habits, and it really starts with our neural pathways, it's really about rewiring our brain. And so what we see, and we use this all the time, even in our learning courses, we need to constantly remind the brain about healthy behavior and the behavior that we want to see, so that it bumps up that particular behavior or message in the SEO of our brains. And so when we constantly remind it, it starts to develop a stronger neural pathway. And when that neural pathway is strong enough, it actually becomes quite automated in our brain. So the visual reminders might seem quite minimal, but it has a major impact in terms of getting into that changed mindset. Regular conversations about the aspects of the job or culture that is detracting from well-being. So how are you tapping into the feedback of your staff so you can understand what needs to change to get to well-being? Creating volunteering opportunities. This is, again, there's such lovely research that talks about community service and how that actually decreases our stress levels. No meeting days. Meetings have shown to have quite an increase in stress levels, especially if those meetings aren't optimized and efficient. Hour-long meetings when actually I was just needed for 5 minutes in that meeting. You know, our examples, we've all been in those meetings. And so we really, there's a really a great, now I can't remember, so there's a author, his name is Stephen, and I can't remember his surname. We'll send the author to you, that wrote a book about meetings, and particularly around virtual meetings and how we can optimize and really change the code of conduct and the rules of engagement so that we optimize meetings. Health fairs to really promote health, offering financial wellness resources to support employees towards financial health. And then I also came across just some really nice ideas of challenges. So as leaders, perhaps think about getting your team to as a group, participate in a challenge, in a move more challenge, in a nutrition ambition challenge, a gratitude challenge, perhaps hiking, sleeping tight tonight, finding the meaning. So really creating an activity that you do as a team together towards some of these aspects that we know heightens wellness and relieves some of the stress symptoms that they might be experiencing. All right, so that is me. Twane, I don't know if we had any questions in the chat box.
There hasn't been any questions in the chat box, so I don't know, maybe I can just give you 1 or 2 questions that we received with the registrations.
Or perhaps even if there are any questions now, if anyone would like to raise their hand.
May I ask a question, please?
Go for it.
This is Zarina. Thank you. I'd like to know, when you're in it and you're experiencing that cycle, what is a simple, quick step to kind of, you know, break out of the cycle so that in order to create healing and moving away from burnout?
Sure, good question, Zarina. I think there would be different coping mechanisms for different people, right? What I can say is if you've been in that cycle for quite a long time, I think you might be fooling yourself to think that there's one small thing that you can do just to get yourself out of it. So that's the one thing that I do want to mention, that if you are experiencing stage 3, 4, or 5 levels of burnout, it really is going to be quite a journey. It's taken you a while to get to that level. It's going to take you a while to get out of that level. And so it'll likely be a number of things, a number of interventions that you would need to do. But, you know, if it's really around heightened stress and getting yourself out of that state, there's really some practical things that you could do. Exercise has a tremendous result on your brain, on your physical body, etc. Looking at meditation and mindfulness, those are also fantastic ways of calming your mind, you know, getting rid of some of those stress symptoms that you might be experiencing in the moment. So those are maybe 2 things that you can do immediately, and implementing that quite regularly in your rhythms or your habits will really have quite a good positive effect. Then there's also things that you can do to involve your manager or your colleagues, even just by talking about it, or family members, being able to share that this is where I'm at, this is what I'm going through, I'm really struggling, I need help. Because often when we're stuck in it, we don't see the light, we don't see other perspectives. All we see is the darkness, the fatigue, we just feeling the depletedness of all of it. And so reaching out to the people around us to give us other perspectives, to help us navigate our way. What is the next first step that I can take towards getting healthier? Often when we're stuck, when you're really truly in burnout, you can't see it. You can't see what the next best step is, but the people around you would be able to guide you. And then obviously, I think a very important step is to seek help, to seek mental professional help that can really guide you, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, really guiding you through the journey to get better, to get to good coping mechanisms, and to get out of that sense of burnout.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Serena. Good question.
So, Lumay, this is Oscar Tate speaking.
Hi, Oscar.
Hi. So, what you refer to in some of the, it's in a corporate is quite a no-go area at times, especially in a high productive area. We've got a lot of young professionals, and then also big plants running. I'm interested in the coaching, and because this is not a topic that you would like to discuss once off, because it takes some time. Others that work with yellow seed, and can it go down to to the different levels, supervisors, foremen, and then obviously the managers, and you do that in groups?
So let me understand the question, Oscar. So you're asking, can we teach our supervisors so line managers, supervisors, going all the way down the organization to be able to deal with or to be able to talk about mental wellness? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, both. How to deal with it, and first of all, the first process that is to acknowledge it.
Yes.
And then rather by ignoring it, to as you have mentioned earlier, it's okay not to be okay. And people, what I found from in reporting into me, some of them are quite upfront, and they will speak about it, and then some people just ignore it. They will hide their feelings, and I find that quite it's got a definitely an impact on the productivity and only on your well-being. And I would like to from outside have that engagement.
So very good question, Oscar. So I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that most employees would be feeling it, right? So when if they are not expressing it, it's not because it's not necessarily present, but as you rightly say, it's not always safe to say that I'm not okay, and that talks to the culture of the organization. And so it's really about how do we make it safe from a culture point of view as an organization to talk about these things. And so then we start talking about how do we change the culture, which is really about, and that's why I wanted to start off with, there's a benefit case here for the organization to invest in mental well-being. It's not just about the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. And so there is a community type of benefit that we get, but there's also a real hardcore business benefit that we get. And so how do we ensure that we communicate that this is why we're doing mental well-being? It's because we want people to be healthier, to really show up as their best selves, to be competent, to be present, to be able to fully engage with the task that they've been given. And we know that when mental health is not present, they're not able to do it. The second thing I think is to normalize it, to make it less stigmatized. I think we come from an era where if you had a mental issue, there was something wrong with you. Whereas what the data is telling us is that the majority of people are struggling with mental health issues. So it's not that something is wrong with you. It's that I almost want to say it's that something is right with you, because you are normal. There is something about struggling with mental health and stress and burnout that is normal. There's and I think it's about bringing that into our language, bringing it into the way that we communicate, the way that our leaders are communicating. Those are just, some of my 2 cents worth at least, but I think it does talk about the culture, about normalizing it, and bringing it into our language and what we are rewarding, what we are encouraging, what we are communicating from a culture point of view. But tricky. And it's not going to happen overnight, is it, Oscar?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Oscar. Yes, and I see Felicity says that she agrees with Oscar. Trust, sincerity, and putting theory into practice is a huge stumbling block for leaders. So you'll also see in the chat box that I did say we will be sharing a guide. I know LeMay mentioned it earlier on, with some tips that we did mention, but yeah, just for your reference, you will be receiving that via email. Is there anyone else who would like to just ask a question or comment on something in the meantime?
Hello, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. It's Melissa speaking.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, sorry guys, I joined a little bit late. I had some, with the load shedding and stuff on this side, but thank you. I at least got a good part of it, I think. So just a comment from my side, LeMay, yes, thank you very much for your well-structured presentation, and also, including the tips. And I think for me, perspective that I've made up now in terms of awareness is going back to full-time work. For some people that's really worked a long time, from home. The whole burnout issue could have happened during this time already. So I think from my side, it will take creating awareness, it will become a full-time job, especially for us in the profession that I am in. And, making not only the leaders, but also the employees aware of where they are in these stages, if they are there, and what can they do about that. So, yes, I think it will be a continuous job. And from my side, working at the university with the students, it's really scaled up the information that we need to give them through in terms of well-being at work, etc. So it will remain an ongoing job for us. And but thank you for the awareness. I think this whole part of the presentation that I saw creates a lot of awareness, and people can identify with what you said. Thank you, LeMay.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Melissa. And I think, yeah, exactly what you're saying. The awareness role. It's any other change initiative, like any other change initiative, right? We need to constantly remind our employees, our colleagues, ourselves even, that this is what we're dealing with. This is what it looks like. This is what you need to be looking out for. Here's how you can deal with it. The more we normalize it, make others aware of it, the more able we will be to really deal with it at a deeper level. So I love that comment. All right. Okay, I think let's perhaps pause there then, Twane. Let me just say thank you to all of you. Thank you for listening. We'll share what we can with you. We'd love to hear from you if there's any specific things that you want to talk about even more. As I said, there's some esteemed colleagues on the call as well, and I think it's a topic that we need to all be contributing towards. We all have a role to play, but I am also excited to see the progress already. I think that's the one positive that came out of, not the one, but one of the positives that came out of the pandemic is really the light that's shining on mental health and the increased awareness that we're seeing, because it is such a prevalent issue. So let's continue the good work, and we'll all make a difference there where we are. Wonderful. We'll all see you soon. Please join us for our next webinar. We'll be communicating that on social media and our newsletters. We hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone.